Okay, so what I have done is I've gone ahead and labeled my squares here. So we're going to do a dry brush, Sgraffito, wet on wet, scumbling. We're going to do some hard edge and some soft edge. The one thing I forgot to mention that you may want to have when you are working, I just have some of, again, these are ones that I keep from like takeout. I'm always hoarding plasticware. So I've got some knives, spoons, forks, whatever. And if we were in the classroom, you would be using toothpicks. But amazingly enough, I do not have any toothpicks in my house at the moment. So I don't have those. So I use these to get the paint out of the container or to mix them. Now, when we're talking about the paint, we are going to put it on one of our pieces of palette paper. Don't go bonkers. While these are 4" by 4" squares, you really won't need a ton of paint. And especially like if you're doing these parts down here, again, not going to need a ton of paint. So we don't want to go too buck wild and crazy with our paint initially, because we do have 2 more painting projects. So just keep in mind that this is your smaller containers are meant to last you the rest of the semester. So let's get some paint here. I'm gonna grab, let's just do some red because I'm feeling like some red paint. Now, if your red paint looks a little bit different, that's also okay. I know one of the reds looks a little bit more on the pink side. So I'm just gonna put down just a small amount of red. There we go. I just realized I don't have anywhere to put that over here. Okay, let's see how long it takes me to stick my arm in that paint that I just set to the side. When you are done, make sure that you close your paint up. If you leave your paint open, it will dry out on you, and then you are going to need to get more paint on your own. So it's really important. Acrylic paint dries very, very quickly. Make sure that your containers stay sealed. So for the first technique here, we're going to be doing dry brush. So now I'm going to zoom in. This is exactly like what it sounds like. We are going to be using a dry brush. So do not wet your brush. Do not wet your brush. I'm going to use one of the wide brushes here. Don't wet your brush before you use this. So we want to see what the difference is here. Now notice I am not putting a ton of paint on my brush. In fact, that even feels like it might be a little bit too much. So I'm going to brush a little bit off. And then the idea here is you have this decently sized space. We want to see what happens when we can see some of our brush marks. Okay, if I pick up a little bit more paint on a dry brush, what does that look like? Do you see this kind of textured bit that we're getting here? That's what we're looking for here. Okay, so there we go. We have a little dry brush technique there. Now, Sgraffito is different. This is where we're actually going to put some paint on our paper and then go ahead and like engrave into it. So I'm cleaning off my brush. One of the things that you will need to make sure that you're doing is changing your water frequently, especially as you change colors. I think I'm going to keep working with this red because I still have a significant portion of red out, but we're going to do this Sgraffito. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take the red and we're going to put more red down this time. And we're going to do red in 2 different ways. So I'm going to do some red. And the first way we're going to do this is with the red paint still being wet. So I'm almost gonna like visually swap this. Okay, then I'm gonna take the back of my brush, or if you have a toothpick, you can do that. And I am going to make patterns. into my paint. Maybe I'm going to do a series of little lines. So really this is kind of about this experimentation and seeing how the paint reacts. Now, remember, you've got paint on one end and now you have put a little paint there at the back end. Make sure that you are wiping that off so that you don't accidentally get that all over yourself. Now, this one we're gonna let dry for a moment, and then we're gonna come back and we're gonna put a second layer on top, and we'll see the red peeking through. Now remember, acrylic paint dries very, very quickly. So while we're waiting though, I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the wet on wet, and we'll come back to the Sgraffito. So with wet on wet, again, I'm going to clean my brush off, and this is where I typically use, these are some microfiber cloths that I used to clean my house with, but now I have relegated them to the rag bin. I am known for cutting up old t-shirts or old pants and using those as rags. Nothing ever goes to waste in an art teacher's house. So I'm going to take a little bit of water, and I'm going to put this down. Now you guys may see that water already has a red tinge to it. That's because I've been using that red paint. And so that's what I mean about needing to make sure that you are cleaning your water frequently as you switch colors. So now I've got a wet brush. Okay, a wet brush is going to feel very different than the dry brush, which you guys did in that first square. So I've got a wet brush, and let's see if I can get both of these things in my frame. So now I've got a wet brush, and we're gonna see how that reacts differently. So you can almost see like the paint spreading. And then if you grab a little bit more water, you can almost push that paint around a little bit. And you can see how it's creating like this feathered texture at the edge. Now I'm continuing to use my big fat wide brush because that's kind of what I grabbed initially. You may use, you may try to grab a skinnier brush and see how that feels, and see what happens when you use this. Now, here's the thing. We're working on watercolor paper, so there will be a little bit of wrinkling. I think mine might wrinkle a little bit more than yours because I'm using a slightly different brand than you. One of the things that you need to be careful, water can be excellent with acrylic paints. You can't go too far though. It will really thin out some of the paints, which is sometimes what you want, but it can also be a problem where if you get too much water, you can actually lift the paint up underneath it if you are doing something with layers. So again, trying to be careful here. We're gonna give this just a few more minutes to dry, this Sgraffito. It's almost there, and we will come back and I will do a second layer of a different color on top so you can see what happens when we do that. Okay, we're back for this Sgraffito. So I'm gonna grab a brush here. I need to clean one off for myself and not get paint all over my clothes. I highly recommend that you never wear like really super nice things while you're working. While I was waiting for that to dry, and this is really important to mention, and I'll probably mention it in all of the videos, is that I want to make sure that you're keeping your brushes in the water. If they have paint on them, they should be resting in the water. Don't just rest it to the side with the paint on it. That's an excellent way for paint to dry on your brushes and ruin your bristles. So please, again, don't do that. Leave your brushes in the water if you are not using them. And again, you guys can see how dirty my water has already gotten. I need some clean water here. So I'm going to grab another color, and I'm going to grab blue here. And I'm going to put blue, a quick layer of blue right on top of this red here for this Sgraffito. And then I'm going to, while it's still wet, I'm going to take and give just, you know, a layered texture effect on top. Let's do the same thing over here. There we go. I like symmetry, man. Sometimes it's really nice. So that is, you know, that shows you how different that looks compared to that. So you can do a layer and then do a second layer on top, and while that paint is still wet, do the Sgraffito technique. It's a really cool technique. It really allows you to add some visual interest and almost use the paint as a sculptural technique without using thick layers of paint.